I'm Matt Butler, CEO of Bonsai Data Solutions. We're here to share about our journey, sorting through the customer journey and our how we use the graph to solve problems in business intelligence and marketing analytics. I'm here with Corey Lanum.
Hi, I'm Corey. I work for a company called Cambridge Intelligence. We helped Bonsai build the graph application that they're deploying out to their end users and formed the basis of the UI. So how do you show this to people and have them understand what they're looking at?
So how many people here today, I'm just curious, have any familiarity with marketing analytics, web analytics? Okay, so web analytics for sure. So there'll be some topics we talk about today that might be familiar. There'll be others maybe a little different. We're trying not to get too much into the nitty-gritty of the space and share just more about kind of the high level of how I think the graph has impacted what we're doing, a little bit about marketing measurement, some of the challenges that face our clients. I should mention Bonsai Data Solutions is a business intelligence and data advisory. So we work with retail companies, we work with startups, healthcare. We're basically helping those teams modernize their marketing and business intelligence. It means a lot of different things. In this case, we'll talk a lot about the customer journey and how we're helping those clients of ours understand that better. But yeah, that's a little bit about Bonsai. So the agenda for today, we're hoping to demo a little bit of our tech and our use cases with Neo4j and with KeyLines, the tool from Cambridge. We'll get to that in a minute, but before we do, we just want to share a little bit about why customer journeys, why is this an interesting problem that the graph came in to help us solve at Bonsai, and we're hoping to see it take off, not just with our clients, but in the space in general. So why the customer journey is a graph? Again, we'll demo our tool Pixis, which is our solution acceleration. It's a platform built for kind of our teams to use for our services at scale. We'll share how we use Bloom, which I think a lot of people are probably familiar with. Corey will talk probably a little bit about UI and UX stuff that we're using and some stuff about why I think KeyLines is a good fit for us.
Yep.
And then a couple wins that we've seen with our clients already and sort of what we're planning to do next. So and I'm hoping to save a bunch of question or Q&A time. Again, we'll do a demo. I think some of this stuff is probably better to explore after we kind of do a few things. So hopefully we'll have time to take questions or people have thoughts. So I guess to start with why customer journeys, you might have been asked to do this in other, well, at least in my world, we'd asked to think about this question all the time, right? Think about the last big purchase you made. I also want to throw in, think about maybe a really small purchase you might have made, even this morning. I'll revisit this, why I think it's kind of critical and something that we're excited to share. But yeah, just sort of think about that kind of stuff. And I guess the question being, when you made that purchase, what led you to do that, right? If you can kind of just think back and we'll talk about why that could be interesting in a second. I should mention before we move on, that question, why did you make a purchase? That's the question every one of my clients is really trying to answer at the end of the day. So if you're not familiar, business and marketing teams, right, they spend millions of dollars a lot of times, not just on advertising, on promotions, on coupons, on data, on all these orchestrations and executions. There's a lot of money gets sunk into acquiring and growing customers. And so they spend a lot, I guess they don't all spend a lot of time and money, but most clients who understand sort of the importance of all of that investment, they're desperate to try to understand, what's working and what's not. And I think it's kind of a notoriously tough problem to unpack. It's not a new problem. There's been a lot of there's a whole industry around solving that problem. And there's kind of two typical approaches. I would say they're still the mainstream approaches with a modern lens today. But just real quickly, I want to visit those two approaches and explain, because what we're doing at Bonsai is fundamentally in a lot of ways different than both of the approaches. And we think it's better than both of the approaches. But that's kind of quite a claim, right? Or quite an idea to try to wrap your head around. So it's to even convince ourselves. And Corey, when did we start working on Pixis with you guys?
Mid 2020. I don't remember the exact date.
Okay, so it was like we started Bonsai, the pandemic came, shut everything down, and then we were like, we got to incubate a better way to do this. Yeah, and so that's kind of how it went from our perspective. But yeah, so like we've been working on it only a couple years, so I think you'll get to see a little bit of where we're at today with it. But it is important to think about from our perspective, like why would we even try? Like what is interesting about a different approach? And to do that, you got to think about sort of like what exists. So there's two real ways to measure marketing and media or customer impact, right, of different strategies. Think of them as two approaches. There's like a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. Top-down approach is like if your background is in statistics or math, you're very familiar with how people do top-down analysis of basically like the assessment of some sort of action on an outcome, and in most of these cases it's business outcomes, right? Whether it be sales or revenue or customers or whatever. And so they call that media mix modeling, or there's other terms, but that's a pretty typical one. It uses statistics, it uses multivariate regression. How does it happen? I'll just say, like, think of it this way. Basically, companies just take all their data, like the big data you all deal with, they summarize it and basically smush it down into like big macro totals. Think like daily total sales for a company, or like there's a way that they measure television media called a GRP. I don't know, real media wonks, but I don't even know what that term means. But basically, like, it's this big number that Nielsen has published for like 70 years, and they try to summarize exactly how many people watch a television ad in like a little number. So let's say like, it's a 2, right? And so like these kind of numbers, right? These big summary data are put into basically in a statistician's hands, and then they analyze it. What is the good about this? Why has this been done for so long? I mean, statistics are rigorous, and they're helpful, and they're useful, right? Like it's. You can infer and understand like really interesting things about like how the weather impacted your sales, or how your TV strategy or your radio or your digital. Like, it's not that you can't learn great things from media mix modeling. What is the disadvantage? It's expensive, so you have to pay for statisticians. No, but I mean more than that, right? Like taking all that data, like there's a process of like taking like in effect better data and making it simpler, and then getting it in the process of modeling. I don't know. Some of the things around media buying and digital strategies have changed this, but it's not just expensive, but because you can only get analysis every like quarter, or maybe at best every month. Most companies get like one analysis for an entire year. It's not super actionable. So like it's very common. Like businesses today are like paying a lot of money to get like an analysis from this tech where the insight is how something did 2 years ago. And then they got to get like, they're using that somehow to play in like today. And so intuitively we're like, well, it feels like is the world the same as it was 2 years ago? Like, I mean, these are kind of like sort of obvious questions. And it really hampers the utility of this stuff. So they take like very like general things happen. Like, okay, well, we should spend less on this. Well, how much? Well, I'm not gonna get into that. Just like slightly less, right? Or more on this, right? And like that, they consider that a big win. Digital analytics is the other way, the bottoms up way. Corey, you deal with some companies that use a lot of digital analytics for some of the other use cases too?
Yeah, I mean, it's really common in all kinds of industries which have a presence on the web, because you have access to all of that data. It's getting generated every time somebody clicks on anything, every time somebody responds to an email. Everybody has access to it, but for the most part, it's useless.
Yeah, so it's incredible, right? And sometimes it's called clickstream data. If you've dealt with Google Analytics, if you've dealt with Adobe Analytics, if you've dealt with companies who do a lot of digital advertising, like on Facebook or Amazon or Google, right? There's all this like extremely detailed, like touch point level data. Like Bonsai leverages that in Pixis, and we'll show you kind of like why it's different. But it's great. Baked in this is really amazingly granular correlations of like this activity happened and then this like outcome happened. Like someone clicked and someone bought, and like I have like this happened, right? So it's fast. Oh, and it's available like pretty freaking quick. Like usually, sometimes real time, other times within minutes and hours. So like you can make fast decisions. These are all awesome. What's not great about it? Well, it is very heavy. It's very big. So I mean, that's getting to be less of a problem thanks to like hopefully companies like ours and I'm sure many of you, right? I mean, some respects it doesn't scare people as much as it used to, but still, it's a lot of data. The context and the fact that it's siloed is the biggest challenge with digital. So getting back to like what are these data? These are at the end of the day just correlations of activities and outcomes. And so the biggest thing that we see is you'll see like 3 or 4 different technologies will have their own unique silo of data. And say like I bought a coffee from Starbucks. Like today, if I did it this morning, it's very likely that Starbucks was told that a Google ad helped that sale, the email program helped that sale, the loyalty program helped that sale, and they all are taking full credit for, so basically in their data there's 4 sales. Okay, like, and then like the finance people and the data folks are like, well, there weren't 4 sales, man. Like there was one. So like, how, which one caused it? None of those data have any way of answering that question. Like they're not even set up to answer that question. So yeah, it leads to conflicting views. That leads to other decision problems like, well, crap, I can't trust this data, or what, I take it with a grain of salt. I can use it directionally. So you kind of end up in a similar situation as MMM. It also has done this, like in my opinion, it's fueled this bad paradigm situation where because it's been so available, because you can act fast, there's been basically attribution models thrown at these data to say like, well, what should we give? We can't give 4 credits for the sale, so what should get credit for the transaction? And sometimes the model to do that fast in the data like diverges from like our own intuitive sense of like causal impact in just incredible ways. Hopefully there's some good examples we can share in a second.
So one of the things when I started working, if you go back real quick, when I started working with Matt in 2020, and he walked me through both of these approaches and kind of where Bonsai wanted to do things differently. I'm not a marketer, but neither one of these approaches really struck me as being graphy. So if you just say JetBlue Airlines, I don't care that Corey specifically bought a flight from Boston to Austin on June 6th. I'm looking at the aggregate data. How many people are doing this? What are they paying in fares? Do I need to add another flight? That's not really graph. Graph is kind of diving down to the individual data elements themselves. And the same with the bottom up. Yeah, that's a graph problem because I have access to, okay, he clicked on an email, he then went to this site, he went to advanced to this page. So I do have a graph there, but it's not a graph at the level at which I care because that's what individual customers are doing. It's not how do I use that in an aggregate sense to improve my business. So it was really interesting to see how we can kind of take both of these approaches and then turn it into a graph problem. So that's kind of what we're going to go into here.
To be fair to Corey and in everything you did with KeyLines and Cambridge, like when Bonsai came to incubate on this problem with you guys, like our stuff wasn't a graph. Like it literally wasn't in a graph. Like,
right.
We were like, we think this is a graph. Like, can you help us make this, right? And so yeah, very, very true. I mean, there's shared problems. I guess a couple things that both models have that are a bit of a challenge. Again, this idea of joining data. Missing critical dimensions, I think, is one of the key things I hope to demo today that we're really excited about. So on the digital analytics side of things, as Corey mentioned, there's like this ability to chain events together, typically down to somebody's down to a customer. You might be familiar with like a cookie. So these are like the ways that people this is like the way when people talk about like user journeys in like the industry, they're talking about like things they can tie back to like a cookie or an IP address or something like that, right? So those are a dimension to connect data, but that's not like all the ways that these things interact, right? Like a radio ad was on a station, which is in a location, which happened at a certain time, right? Like, and also customer activity has these same things. Like all of those types of dimensions don't exist in digital analytics, right? That's not like how things are typically connected. And then it retains a lot of unnecessary details. I like the idea of like the small purchase or something you might do frequently in that example, just to try to pay off like why I made everyone think about that. Is anyone like, you open up like the email from the thing you're looking to buy, and you open up the email like a bunch of times, right? You're all gonna get to it later, and kid calls, or you got other stuff to do, and you eventually get to it, but like you might interact with that thing like 100 times. You will eventually buy. If we were to play that whole thing back, could you tell me like exactly how many times you did that? Or like was the last time you visited the email, like that was the thing that made you buy? Like, obviously not, right? You'd made up your mind, like the whole the fact that like the email was received and that you got the offer, I mean, that probably played a big role. But in digital analytics today, like they literally make that arbitrary distinction. So the 99th time you went to the email had no impact according to that. And then the 100th time, it generated all the impact. Well, what if they were different promotions? What if like little arbitrary nuances come into play, and then people get data that says, well, this thing didn't work and this thing did. And then they stop doing the thing that they say didn't work, and they're like, well, sales are not going the right direction. What happened? I thought we got rid of the stuff that wasn't working. It was just a terrible data model, right? But that's sort of when we talk about it, it retains all this unnecessary, like the unnecessary like detail that we all intuitively understand clearly doesn't matter, right? In like a customer journey or a purchase decision, it's all in the data. That's the model. It's almost built entirely on unnecessary stuff. And so, I guess with all that.
Yeah, so that clickstream data is, sorry, just one more comment, is where I started to think, okay, so those critical dimensions are more graphy than just the clickstream stuff, which maybe isn't. But if you merge that with, like Matt talked about, a radio ad being in a specific location, targeted on a specific station to a specific group of customers, those are all nodes, and there is links between them, and they all have a timestamp associated with them. So now you can start to see how this might form a graph, and how looking at it as a graph might make sense and help you better understand what it is.
This will be scary because I'm trying to navigate looking at this screen down here. All right, so I wanted to share. That's not going to affect. Sorry, can you guys see this at all, or is it way too small? You can see it? Okay. So just want to do a quick show of, we use both environments today, and like the way that we are approaching the customer journey and analyzing the graph for our clients. This is the Bloom interface. For us, it's descriptive analytics. It's very much that like the true, like the graph, right, of have everything connected at a low level. We don't actually come up with like our insights to change our customers' decision making from Bloom, but this is a great place for us to understand what questions to ask, or like understand what are the things to build analytics out on, which I think is probably common to how a lot of people in other industries use Bloom as well. But for us, like what does that mean? So loaded up here, we have our demo client, and you see some nodes of types of data that we are capturing on our graph. So you see things like the customer, you see like this medium and campaign and source. These things refer to like types of ways businesses try to engage with their clients. So a medium might be like a paid search ad, a source might be Facebook. And then there's other things. If I hit enter here, shouldn't it? There we go. So like what is interesting, or like how do you get your thoughts starting about like how we can understand how the data connects? So I just put one of the nodes in here, which is the keyword node. And then for like us, or in this example, right, every dot is representing a certain keyword that essentially was what someone engaged on a search engine, like is looking for a certain type of product, right, or certain service. They reach the business, right, from this way. And so like you can infer a lot of things. Like if you're in the paid search business, you can infer a lot from like keywords, but like ultimately these are the unique ones. Like you're not looking at like all of the clicks right now. You're looking at like, okay, what's a unique term? And then from here I can expand, and I could say, okay, well, like in this model, right, I have 3 different touch points, right, that keyword like generated for the business. And then from here I can see things like, okay, well, that's a touch point, interesting, like who generated that? Okay, so there's no customer here, so this person is a prospect, they haven't ever bought, right? So maybe that's a sign of, whatever it is, but like we can, I think I can, no. there's other things I can get about the touch points, but I can understand not just the who, but I just brought up the location there. So the city, Moralina. Does anyone know where that is? I should probably know my own demo. So then location is obviously a node, and we're connecting, like the touch point happened from a customer or a prospect in a certain location. I won't continue building on this. You get the idea of like the first big change from the other kind of models to like where we're able to take this thanks to the graph is things are connected now more than just on a user. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you covered it.
Yeah. Corey is the graph expert of the two of us. I'm the not expert. Okay, so, and that makes sense, right? So then I can say, oh, well, there's a city, who else is located there? And then there's another touch point, what customer did that? Or like what channel drove it? I mean, there's ways to understand in our world. Okay, so it was a touch point that came from Google. As like analysts in business intelligence and marketing analytics, this is really interesting because like we're trying to find groups of customers that fit certain profiles or activities that we might not be able to understand are related or impactful to generating outcomes. And it might be very different by time, by location, by group. Like just because a term or a strategy is working in, Moralina has no bearing on if it would work in San Francisco or something like that, right? So that's Bloom. So great, we can explore this data over the graph, like what are we talking about from like a measurement perspective, like taking it to the level of like what is an insightful analytics on top of that. That's where KeyLines came in, that's where like our tool we call Pixis. I will try to, can I refresh the screen? Sorry. That was dangerous. All right, so this is again our live data demo. So this is a demo data set, but kind of, again, it's a tool that we're using internally, like our engagement managers, our analysts use this tool actively to give the insights to our clients. We don't sell this as a licensed software for users yet, but for us, it's like we think it's really powerful because it's a new way of thinking. It's a perfect fit for what we're trying to do. It starts with something simple, like, I don't know if you want to comment, like this is actually a KeyLines element.
It is, yeah. So basically you're still looking and you're querying the graph, but you're just looking at the number of relationships because every relationship has a timestamp in their data set occurring per time. So you can see, I want to start my analysis by focusing on just one quarter or just 1 month or something like that. And to be able to do so visually, I think is pretty powerful.
Another weakness or thing to know about the way marketing is typically measured or these decisions are made is we are, execs want to know how things are going in May of 2022. So what do? May sales data, May activities, like how did May go? And things get judged that way. The reality is the interactions you're having and the outcomes are they're two completely separate things. They have their own unique timescales. Traditionally, to analyze the long-term impact of something and the short-term impact, it's two analyses. With KeyLines, with the graph, we have a single data model, a single framework for all types of, we can do short-term analytics, long-term analytics. We analyze the touch points completely independently from the outcomes. So I can say, so this first example, what if I'm just measuring, what was my activities of last year? What's the impact it's had all the way through this year? It's as simple as drag and drop on the touch points. Then there's a new bar that comes up and says, well, tell us how much business impact you want to measure. You want to measure it through the first quarter? You want to measure lifetime value? Do you want to look at all these kind of things, right? So it's the way we're using the time series, which is really, we love.
Yeah, one of the things that when Matt was describing this to me and what made it click for me was that, if the company sends me a mailer about a car in July, and I have a touch point. I go to the car website and I take a look and it seems interesting. But then I don't buy the car until September. Maybe they wouldn't even know that the mailer was relevant because they would focus just on September and say, what did we do in September? Well, no, I got the mailer in July, but that's outside the range of what they're looking at. But by having a graph, which it shows that kind of chain, then you can actually walk your way back.
Now here's 4 node aggregations that we use that mean a lot to kind of our day-to-day. So a campaign, a medium, a source, and a keyword. So when you're about to see our Pixis map, it's the aggregated, like granular data. It's all this great stuff underneath the hood, but the nodes are, again, we don't care if it's the 100th or the last click or whatever. We just care, well, the email mattered, the interaction on organic search mattered, the radio ad mattered, right? Those are unique things. We want to know if it was 2 of them or 3 of them or 1 of them or 10 of them, right? But so the data you're about to see, the way it's connected is, think of them as like, what are the unique interactions you're having, more so than like every tiny little arbitrary one. So I'll bring up Medium to start. So, man, this is tricky. Build your analysis. So you're going to get back this map, and there shouldn't be too many nodes. There we go. So here we have the customer graph, the journeys of all of the customers of this business, and the interactions that they've taken with those customers, like graphed. And so here's where everything, basically there's a business event in this example that's like, okay, that's what matters, what connects to that. And you see a bunch of other nodes. It's not super clear on the screen, but each node, so like this top one is organic, so like people who use search, free search results, right? There's referral, traffic. There's, they call cost per click is the term for like paid ads on search engines. There's banner advertising. There's email in here, promotion like that they sent to customers, and if that interacted. These are all on here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that you see the little the pie chart that surrounds the node too. That's, I believe, the percentage of those that actually became customers, right?
Yeah. So it's not like how many of them, like all of the people, in this promotion necessarily. It was the last thing that drove them to sale, but they were a part of converted customers, right? So it's obviously like, okay, it's a very limited promotion. That seems like a really high percentage, but obviously it was effective, right?
Right.
So like
at some point, maybe not directly from the promotion, but at some point during their journey, they became a customer.
And then, so you see like this, so there's this concept, this is one aggregation. All of the other aggregations that like, I guess matter to us now are, I don't want to look at them all. Give me source. It's as simple for us as just flipping the view. And so now it's like, okay, that was our programs, our people who run the is that working? Now it's every source, it's basically like every site on the internet or every place in their social networks or whatever that are like, unique, right? So you see like there's a Google logo on here, see Bing and Taboola and Yahoo and a bunch of others, right? But we can, now it's independent of if it was paid or not, but we understand like what is the effect of like these elements. When I click on a node, what lights up is a couple things. You'll see like these edges, the size of them and the color relate to like how many customers interact with both things, right? Green is better than gray. We're still working on the colors. But we're getting there. But then you can see like instantly, okay, like, here's channels where customers are engaging across different areas. That can sometimes be as interesting as even understanding if media is working on some level. The other thing that is really cool is getting back to like the power of media mix modeling and statistics. Like the big question you're trying to ask is what would have happened if we didn't do something? Like that's really the thing. They call it incrementality in our world. And the graph lets us do something really, really cool, which is actually show what the world looks like without something. And it's not something that takes us 90 days to do. So like for us, it's, okay, well, we now know everything that was, had a touch point that was affected by Google. I can go over here. I can find, if I do this right.
Yeah, so the key here is that you're not necessarily saying, okay, everybody, let's say I have Instagram ads. Just because if I remove Instagram ads, it doesn't mean that everybody who interacted with Instagram is no longer going to buy my product. Many of them probably would have found it some other way. So that's kind of what we're doing here is we're using the graph to see how else might they have gotten there and what proportion of them would have. So what's the increment of adding the
So and we might find that something was really critical or we might not, but we build the analysis. You're about to see now all of the customer journey without Google, right? The whole thing, right? So what does the world look like without something? So we use that really like a lot. That kind of leads into our use cases. Yeah.
What are the disassociated nodes around the?
Awesome question. So the other challenge, like axiom in marketing measurement, which kind of gets back to the original problem is, the old half of marketing doesn't work. I don't know which half. these nodes, in this case, are like customer engagements have occurred, like you've driven touch points from certain sources, and at no point have any of the customers or people you've engaged with had any connection to anything else that succeeded. So we call them like, you guys call them the singletons?
Singletons. Yeah, that's the graph term.
We're working on that. We're workshopping a term for that in our industry because we have to think of something different. But basically, those isolated nodes are like, you can think about some of those are, you have to worry about. Like in this example, it might just be like people engaged, you're not paying for that, it's fine. But you can have nodes over there you're spending a lot of money on. And you could say, all right, well, I've got 2 channels, I spend a lot of money on both. One of them has a connection to the success graph of customers. It may not be the most, but there's at least like, there's some risk, right? If I were to divest from that, like there's a good chance like at least this will have a negative impact. Those ones on the edge, what you couldn't answer really well before is like, okay, I can definitively say, right, thanks to this graph, these things have no risk. Like you can cut them all or reallocate them, whatever. And a lot of times, I guess getting back to the practical use of media mix modeling and optimization, right? It sounds so like, sexy, I guess, for lack of a better word, from a data perspective, like you're gonna optimize everything. Like really it's an exercise in getting rid of stuff that's like bad. That's like all the value for the most part comes in. Can you do that all like rapidly? And just like, you're almost not even trying to fix the best stuff or tweak it, if you get to that, good on you. But like that identifying aspect alone of like this tool and KeyLines' capability, that was, for us, it was a game changer. When we saw that it could like have those isolated areas, we're like, this is awesome. We could point to like things that are on the chart. Everyone understands it's not connected to success. Mm-hmm. No one's gonna debate us, right? We can put our analysis, through the system. So there's a few other fun things. I mentioned that we connect data outside of just the users. So you're looking at a lot of like, at the end of the day, a lot of stuff on the screen is like identity related in terms of connecting. Like, this user did this or this customer did that. We also, like what you don't see visualized is all of the things that we can connect by region and location and like those kind of, and time, we are also connecting. So like I can, this is like super arbitrary, but I'm just gonna select like a bunch of, there we go. Like say I was running these programs, like this is a real world application, like there might have been a promotion available just in certain areas. I might not have like a receipt for all the promotions, but I know exactly what customer journeys could have been impacted by something because the data is all connected by location and time. So I can select it here. I can, nope, that didn't work. All right. Nope. Go down, build my analysis, and then you're gonna get a result where it's just the customer impact without anything that was like in that region. Or, and there's other examples I could show, like people who could have heard a radio ad, right? We take all those people like who could have heard that out, and then we see what's left as a way to like understand incrementality. So you wanna go to your feature?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about what you saw in Matt's UI was, for the most part, was our product called KeyLines, which is a little bit different than Bloom, and I just kind of wanted to describe what is different about it and what they found useful about it. So one of the things is that they wanted to create an application. So Bloom is great for when you're building your data model and you're the actual end user and you know what's in there and you know what you're looking for, and to get a nice little visual model of that and be able to explore your way through it. But when you want to roll that out to somebody who's a business intelligence analyst who needs to understand what they're looking at, you want a lot more control over what they see and how they interact with the graph. And you don't want them being able to just query anything or issue random searches and explore their way through. So you want to control that UI, both from an interactivity standpoint, but then also from a look and feel, so it looks like an application that you built, which you can't really embed Bloom in something else. So what we offer is a toolkit for being able to do that. And you saw that they took advantage of a lot of the different visual features to make it look very intuitive for that use case, for the business analyst who's doing this kind of stuff. And then the other really important point is that they wanted to decouple the graph model in Neo4j from what they were the graph visualization that they were showing. So, you saw a giant transaction node in the middle of his chart. There's no node in Neo4j called transaction. That's not how they modeled the data, and it's not how it would have made sense to model the data. But that's what the user wants to see. So they're doing a lot of that sort of translation between the data model and the visual model on the fly when they're bringing that data into the application, so that they can present it in a way that makes more intuitive sense. And then the last bit is that they needed to customize that sort of the interactivity around paths. So, a journey is a path, and a user of the tool wants to be able to see what that path looks like and how specific things may traverse their way through the graph, and not via just the expand method. So a few key things that were really helpful for them. Some of these we're still working on in their application. So these aren't screenshots from Pixel, but one of the things is the aggregation piece. This is really key, and this is what we're working on right now, is I don't necessarily, like I talked about right at the beginning, if I am an airline, I don't care what individual passengers are doing unless they're extraordinarily frequent flyers. It's more just, what is the group of them doing? Well, I can take a group, which can be comprised of people who heard a radio spot or people who interacted via a particular method with my website, group those all together, and then look at how that group is connected to other things on the chart. Yeah. So that's what we're kind of doing over here on the left. I talked a little bit just a minute ago about the path highlighting. So once I do drill down to a specific type of customer, type of prospect, what is their typical journey? How are they working their way through the touch points that I've created in my marketing engine to get to a result, either becoming a customer or not? And then the third one is performance. So you can imagine if I am an e-commerce merchant, I am collecting data on every single click and every single interaction that the customers have and my prospects have with me. And that can be a huge volume. Now, in most cases, you don't actually want to display all of that to the end user, but there are some circumstances where you do want to actually show a large chunk of it, especially if you can take advantage of things like the grouping so that the visual model that you're presenting is more simplified or summarized compared to actually every individual data element that I have. But what we do is we have a good rendering engine to allow for those large charts when it does make sense.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm going to hand it back to Matt.
Yeah, so real quick, 3 real life wins. We've kind of covered them. Traditional media measurement. So again, 90 days, a lot of money. We have a startup company in the gaming space. We're able to do the same level of analytics and did it in a day, right? And then answer other questions they're not able to do. So okay, radio, it's doing okay, could do less of it, but what spots were working really well, we could answer. You can't get that from MMM. Talking about promotions in media, again, using Bloom to understand there is a set of users, the little note at the top, right, of okay, that's a promotion where lots of the red dots are people who redeemed the promotion and then they also were affected by marketing. Those two things are always looked at independently traditionally. We're looking at them together. And then we talked about the time series, being able to look at short-term and long-term in the same view. So we're releasing this to all of our internal clients, our current clients as a alpha and hopefully getting to a beta this year. We're seeing a lot of success on speed. We're building up more business cases, use cases for this kind of tech today. So we're really excited with what we're doing. And this is pretty much it. I guess, I don't know if we have any time for questions or if we used up all the time.
Yeah, we were within 4 seconds of when we were supposed to end. So I'm pretty impressed.